What you're about to hear tonight will fundamentally change how safe you feel in your own home. These aren't campfire tales or urban legends. These are documented, verified, true horror stories that happen to real people just like you and me. I'm your host, and welcome back to SpookFeed. If you're watching this alone in the dark, you should turn on some lights. And if you're new here and love spine-chilling true stories like these, be sure to hit the subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Tonight, we have 5 stories that will make you double-check your locks, question every shadow, and possibly keep you awake until sunrise. So grab a blanket, maybe a friend, and let's dive into our first nightmare. Story 1. The Midnight Visitor. Sarah Martinez thought she lived in the safest neighborhood in suburban Ohio. Tree-lined streets, friendly neighbors, the kind of place where people still left their doors unlocked. That sense of security was completely shattered on the night of October 15th, 2019. Sarah was a night owl, often staying up until 2 or 3 a.m. working on her freelance graphic design projects. Her husband, David, worked early morning shifts, so he was always asleep by 10 p.m. This particular night felt no different from any other, until she heard the first tap on her living room window. At first, she dismissed it as a tree branch, but then it happened again. Tap, tap, tap. 3 deliberate knocks, evenly spaced. Sarah muted her computer and listened carefully. Nothing but silence. She walked to the window and peered through the blinds. The street was empty, bathed in the orange glow of street lamps. No wind could move branches. No explanation for the sound. Returning to her desk, Sarah tried to focus on her work, but 15 minutes later it happened again. This time, the tapping was on a different window, the kitchen window that faced their backyard. Her heart began to race. She grabbed a flashlight and carefully approached the kitchen window. As she reached for the blinds, the tapping stopped. Through the glass, she could make out the dim outline of their backyard. The children's swing set, the garden shed, and the wooden fence that separated their property from the woods beyond. But then she saw it. A figure standing perfectly still at the edge of the tree line. Tall, unnaturally thin, wearing what appeared to be dark clothing. The figure wasn't moving, just watching. Sarah's hands trembled as she reached for her phone to call the police, but when she looked back up, the figure was gone. Not walking away, not running, simply gone, as if it had never been there at all. She decided to wake David, but as she turned from the window, she heard something that made her blood run cold. The sound of their back door handle being tested, slow, deliberate movements as someone, or something, tried to determine if the door was locked. Sarah ran upstairs and shook David awake, whispering frantically about the figure and the door. David, thinking it might be a burglar, grabbed his baseball bat and they both crept downstairs together. Everything was quiet now. They checked every lock, every window. Everything was secure. David searched the backyard with his flashlight but found no footprints, no sign that anyone had been there. The police arrived 20 minutes later and did a thorough check of the property. They found nothing unusual and suggested it might have been a deer or other wildlife that had startled her. But here's where this story takes a truly terrifying turn. 3 days later, Sarah was organizing photos on her computer when she discovered something that made her hands shake uncontrollably. Her security camera, the one that faced the backyard, had been recording that entire night. The footage showed the figure exactly as Sarah had described, but it also showed something else. For over 2 hours before Sarah had noticed it, the figure had been standing in their backyard completely motionless, just watching their house, watching their windows, learning their routines. The most chilling part? The timestamp showed the figure had been there every night for the previous week, always arriving around midnight and leaving just before dawn. They had been watched, studied for days without knowing it. The police investigated further and discovered that 3 other houses in the neighborhood had reported similar experiences over the past month. A tall figure in dark clothing, always appearing at night, always watching, never approaching during the day. To this date, no one has identified who or what was stalking these families. The incident stopped as suddenly as they began, but Sarah and David moved out of that house within a month. Sarah still refuses to live anywhere that backs up to woods, and she's never been able to sleep soundly again. Story 2. The Thing in the Basement. If that story has you checking your windows, You're going to want to stay far away from basements after hearing what happened to the Johnson family in Michigan. Mark and Lisa Johnson bought their dream home in 2018. A beautiful Victorian house built in 1892, complete with original hardwood floors, ornate moldings, and a spacious basement that Mark planned to convert into his workshop. The basement was unfinished but dry, with stone walls and a concrete floor, perfect for his woodworking hobby. Mark spent weeks down there, setting up his tools, installing proper lighting, and organizing his space. Everything was going perfectly until he started hearing the sounds. It began as a soft scraping noise that seemed to come from behind the stone walls. Mark assumed it was pipes settling or maybe small animals that had gotten into the walls somehow. Old houses make strange noises. Every homeowner knows this. But the sounds followed a pattern. Every night starting around 11 p.m., the scraping would begin. It would last exactly 47 minutes. Mark timed it, and then stop abruptly. Never 45 minutes, never 50. Always 47 minutes exactly. The sound seemed to move along the walls, as if something was slowly making its way around the entire perimeter of the basement. Mark tried everything to identify the source. He checked for loose pipes, looked for signs of rodents, and even hired a pest control specialist who found absolutely nothing. After 3 weeks of sleepless nights, Mark decided to stay up and investigate the sound himself. Armed with a flashlight and a crowbar, he went down to the basement at 10:45 p.m. and waited. Right on schedule at 11 p.m. exactly, the scraping began. But being in the basement while it was happening was completely different from hearing it upstairs. The sound was much louder, much more deliberate, and it was definitely coming from inside the walls. Mark followed the sound as it made its way around the basement. When he pressed his ear against the stone wall, he could hear something else, a rhythmic tapping like Morse code, mixed in with the scraping. That's when he noticed something that made his stomach drop. The stone wall had scratches on it. Fresh scratches that definitely hadn't been there when he'd first set up his workshop. Long, parallel gouges in the stone as if something with claws had been trying to scratch its way through. Mark ran upstairs and told Lisa everything. They decided to call a contractor the next morning to examine the walls. What the contractor found changed everything. Hidden behind a false wall that had been expertly concealed, they discovered a small room. The room was maybe 6 feet by 8 feet with no windows and only one entrance, the hole they had just created. Inside the room, they found the remnants of old blankets, empty food cans dating back decades, and scratch marks covering every inch of the walls. But most disturbing of all, they found a journal. The journal belonged to someone named Thomas, and the entries spanned from 1987 to 1995. Thomas wrote about being trapped, about trying to escape, about scratching at the walls every night hoping someone would hear him and rescue him. The final entry was dated December 12, 1995. It simply read, Day 2008-47. I can hear them upstairs. They know I'm down here, but they won't let me out. I won't stop scratching. Someone has to hear me eventually. The contractor examined the room more carefully and found human remains. Bones that the coroner later confirmed had been there for approximately 25 years. Here's the truly horrifying part. The police investigation revealed that the previous owners of the house, an elderly couple named Gerald and Martha Henning, had reported their adult son Thomas as missing in 1987. They claimed he had simply disappeared one day, and despite extensive searches, he was never found. The evidence suggested that Thomas hadn't disappeared at all. Someone had walled him up in that basement room while he was still alive. The scratching sounds Mark had been hearing weren't from pipes or animals. They were Thomas's final attempts to escape, somehow continuing even after death. The Johnsons moved out immediately and never returned. The house has remained empty since 2018. Neighbors report that the scratching sounds can still be heard on quiet nights, exactly 47 minutes starting at 11 p.m., just as Thomas had done for over 8 years while he was alive. Story 3. The Night Shift Horror. Working the night shift at a hospital is already unsettling enough. But what happened to Nurse Jennifer Walsh at St. Mary's Medical Center in Pennsylvania will make you never want to work alone at night again. Jennifer had been a registered nurse for 12 years and was used to the strange atmosphere of hospitals at night. The dimmed lights, the occasional sounds of medical equipment, and the way shadows seemed longer and darker after visiting hours ended. St. Mary's was an older hospital, built in the 1940s with long corridors and rooms that seemed to echo even the smallest sounds. Jennifer typically worked the ICU night shift, caring for the most critical patients who needed constant monitoring. On the night of March 8, 2020, Jennifer was assigned to the fourth-floor ICU, which housed 8 rooms. Only 3 rooms were occupied that night, which meant a lot of empty dark rooms and plenty of time to catch up on paperwork. Everything was routine until around 2:30 a.m. when she heard the elevator ding from down the hallway. This was unusual because the elevators were programmed to require key card access after midnight, and Jennifer was the only staff member on the floor. She looked up from her station at the nurse's desk but saw no one exit the elevator. Thinking it might have been a malfunction, she returned to her work. 5 minutes later, she heard footsteps in the hallway, slow, deliberate steps echoing off the linoleum floor. Jennifer called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" The footsteps stopped immediately. She walked to the hallway and looked in both directions, but it was empty. The emergency lighting cast long shadows, but she could see clearly that no one was there. Returning to her desk, Jennifer checked on her patients via the monitoring system. All 3 were stable and sleeping peacefully. She tried to focus on her paperwork, but the feeling that she was being watched was overwhelming. At 3:15 a.m., she heard the footsteps again. This time they were closer, right outside the nurse's station. Jennifer stood up quickly and walked around the desk to investigate. That's when she saw something that made her freeze in terror. Wet footprints on the floor. Not water, something darker, thicker. The prints led from the elevator, down the hallway, and stopped right in front of her desk. But there was no one there. Jennifer immediately called security. But when Officer Martinez arrived 15 minutes later, the footprints had vanished completely. The floor was dry, as if nothing had ever been there. Officer Martinez did a complete sweep of the floor but found no signs of an intruder. All the rooms were secure, all the patients were safe, and the keycard logs showed that only Jennifer had accessed the floor since her shift began. But Jennifer wasn't imagining things, and she was about to get proof. At 4:45 a.m., while doing her rounds to check on patients, Jennifer entered room 417 to monitor Mr. Peterson, who was recovering from major surgery. As she approached his bed, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. There were wet handprints on the window beside his bed, the same dark, thick substance she had seen in the footprints. But the handprints were on the outside of the window, on the 4th floor of the hospital, 40 feet above the ground. As Jennifer stared at the handprints, she heard a soft tapping on the glass. The handprints began to move, sliding down the window as if someone, or something, was losing their grip and falling. Jennifer screamed and ran from the room, waking Mr. Peterson and triggering every alarm on the floor. Security, doctors, and other nurses rushed to the scene. When they examined the window, they found nothing. No handprints, no evidence that anything had been there. But Mr. Peterson, despite being heavily sedated, confirmed that he had seen the dark figure at the window and had been trying to call for help for hours, but couldn't make his voice work. The hospital reviewed the security footage from that night. What they found was so disturbing that the administration sealed the footage and transferred Jennifer to the day shift immediately. The cameras had captured everything Jennifer described: the elevator opening to an empty car, footprints appearing on the floor with no visible person making them, and most terrifying of all, a dark shadow moving through the hallways, entering patient rooms and standing over sleeping patients for extended periods. The investigation revealed that the hospital had experienced similar incidents for decades. Always on the 4th floor, always during night shifts, the administration had been covering it up to avoid panic and potential lawsuits. Records showed that the 4th floor had been built over the old hospital morgue, which had been destroyed in a fire in 1963. 17 people, including patients and staff, had died in that fire, and their bodies were never recovered. Jennifer never worked another night shift. She still works at St. Mary's during the day, but she refuses to discuss what happened that night. The 4th floor ICU now requires 2 nurses on duty at all times, and they're never allowed to work alone. Story 4. The Moving Day Nightmare. Moving into a new home should be exciting, full of possibilities and a fresh start. But for the Patterson family, moving day became the beginning of the worst experience of their lives. Rebecca and James Patterson, along with their 8-year-old daughter Emma, were thrilled to move into their new home in Oregon. It was a beautiful colonial house built in 1978, with a large backyard and excellent schools nearby. The previous owners had lived there for over 30 years and had maintained it perfectly. The Pattersons got the house for an incredible price, almost 30% below market value. The realtor explained that the previous owners needed to sell quickly due to a job relocation, which seemed reasonable enough. Moving day was September 3rd, 2021. The family spent the entire day unpacking boxes and arranging furniture, excited about their new beginning. Everything was going smoothly until they started unpacking Emma's room. Emma's room was on the second floor at the end of the hallway. It was a corner room with windows facing both the backyard and the side yard, giving it lots of natural light. Emma loved it immediately and couldn't wait to set up her toys and books. As Rebecca was hanging Emma's clothes in the closet, she noticed something odd. There were scratches on the inside of the closet door. Not random scratches, but deliberate marks that looked almost like tallies. 5 vertical lines with a diagonal line crossing through them, repeated over and over again. When she asked James about it, he suggested that maybe the previous owner's children had been marking their height as they grew, though the marks were quite high on the door for a child to reach. That evening, as they were settling in for their first night in the new house, Emma complained that her room felt cold and scary. Rebecca checked the thermostat. The temperature was normal. She also checked the windows to make sure they were properly sealed and everything seemed fine. Around 11 p.m., Emma came running into her parents' bedroom crying hysterically. She claimed that someone was in her closet, whispering her name. James went to investigate but found nothing unusual. The closet was empty except for Emma's clothes, and all the windows were securely locked. They let Emma sleep in their room that night, assuming it was just anxiety about the new house. The next night, Emma again reported hearing whispers from her closet. This time, Rebecca stayed in Emma's room to listen. Around midnight, she heard something that made her heart stop. A soft, childlike voice coming from inside the closet, repeating Emma's name over and over again. When she opened the closet door, the whispering stopped immediately. The closet was empty, but she noticed something new. More tally marks had appeared on the door. Fresh scratches that definitely hadn't been there the day before. Rebecca woke James, and together they examined the closet more carefully. Using a flashlight, they discovered something horrifying hidden behind Emma's hanging clothes. Written on the back wall of the closet, in what appeared to be a child's handwriting, were hundreds of messages. "Let me out. I'm scared. Mommy, where are you?" And, "It's so dark in here." The messages covered every inch of the back wall, written in different colored crayons and pencils. But the most disturbing message was written in red crayon at eye level for a child. "Emma, come play with me. Emma, stay with me. Emma, don't leave me alone." The Pattersons called the police immediately. When officers arrived and examined the closet, they found something that changed the entire investigation. Hidden behind a loose baseboard at the bottom of the closet was a small space, just large enough for a child to hide in. Inside the space, they found children's toys, a small blanket, and a journal written in a child's handwriting. The journal belonged to a little girl named Sophia, and the entries described being locked in the closet for hours at a time as punishment. The entries became increasingly desperate and disturbing, describing hunger, thirst, and fear of the dark. The final entry was heartbreaking. "I've been in here for so long I can't get out. Mommy says I have to stay here until I learn to be good, but I don't know what I did wrong. I'm trying to be good. Please, let me out." The police investigation revealed a horrific truth. The previous owners, Martin and Carol Henderson, had adopted a 6-year-old girl named Sophia in 1985. Neighbors occasionally saw the child, but by 1987 she seemed to have disappeared. When asked, the Hendersons claimed they had sent her to live with relatives. The truth was far more sinister. Evidence suggested that the Hendersons had been abusing Sophia and using the closet as punishment. The child had died in that closet in 1987, and the Hendersons had concealed her death and disposed of her body. The scratch marks on the door weren't tallies. They were Sophia's desperate attempts to count the days she spent locked in that dark space. The whispers Emma heard were Sophia's spirit, still trapped in the place where she died, calling out for help that never came. The Hendersons were arrested and charged with murder. Martin died in prison before the trial, but Carol confessed to the abuse and cover-up. She revealed that they had walled up Sophia's remains in the basement and had been living with this secret for over 30 years. The Patterson family moved out immediately and never returned to the house. Emma required months of therapy to recover from the experience. The house was demolished 6 months later, and Sophia's remains were finally given a proper burial. According to residents, on quiet nights, you can still hear a child's voice carried on the wind where the house once stood. But now it sounds peaceful, as if Sophia has finally found the rest she was denied for so many years. Story 5. The Final Call. Our final story tonight involves something that most of us interact with every day without a second thought: our phones. But after hearing what happened to Michael Torres in Arizona, you might think twice before answering late-night calls from unknown numbers. Michael was a freelance journalist who worked from his home office, often keeping irregular hours to meet deadlines. He lived alone in a quiet neighborhood and preferred it that way. And I was used to the solitude that came with working from home. In November 2019, Michael started receiving strange phone calls. They always came between 2 and 3 a.m., and they always followed the same pattern. The phone would ring exactly 7 times, then stop. If Michael didn't answer, there would be no voicemail, no callback, just silence until the next night. Initially, Michael ignored the calls, assuming they were wrong numbers or maybe telemarketing robocalls with faulty timing. But after a week of interrupted sleep, he decided to answer. "Hello?" Michael said into the phone. The response chilled him to the bone. A child's voice, speaking very slowly and deliberately. "Michael, I need to tell you something important." Before Michael could respond, the line went dead. The next night, the same thing happened. 7 rings, Michael answered, and the same child's voice. "Michael, are you listening to me?" Again, the line went dead before Michael could say anything. This continued for 2 weeks. Each night, the child's voice became clearer, more urgent. The messages began to form a coherent story. "Michael, there was an accident," followed by "Michael, they said it was my fault." And then "Michael, I didn't mean to hurt anyone." Michael tried calling the number back, but it was always disconnected. He contacted his phone company, but they had no record of the incoming calls. According to their logs, his phone never rang during those times. Growing increasingly disturbed and sleep-deprived, Michael decided to record one of the calls. On the 15th night, he set up his equipment and waited. Right on schedule, the phone rang 7 times. "Hello?" Michael answered, his recording device running. This time, the child's voice was different, panicked, desperate. "Michael, he's coming. He knows I told you. You have to help me. Please." The line crackled with static, and then Michael heard something that made his blood freeze. A man's voice, angry and threatening. "You shouldn't have told him. Now you'll pay for what you did." There was a scream, the sound of a struggle, and then silence. Michael immediately called the police, but they were skeptical. How could he prove these calls were real if the phone company had no record of them? The recording Michael had made showed only his own voice saying, "Hello." The child's voice and the man's threats weren't captured at all. Determined to get answers, Michael began researching. He contacted previous residents of his house, checked local missing children reports, and even visited the library to look through old newspaper archives. What he found was devastating. In 1994, a 9-year-old boy named David Chen lived in Michael's house with his family. On November 18, 1994, exactly 25 years before Michael started receiving the calls, David had been playing in the backyard when he accidentally broke a neighbor's window with his baseball. Terrified of getting in trouble, David had run home and hidden in his room. When his father discovered what had happened, he flew into a rage. According to police reports, David's father had beaten him so severely that the boy died from his injuries. The father, Robert Chen, had panicked and buried David's body in the backyard, then reported him missing. The case was never solved, and the Chen family moved away 6 months later, leaving David's body hidden beneath what is now Michael's garden shed. The most chilling discovery was the date of David's death, November 18, 1994. The anniversary was approaching, and Michael realized that David had been trying to tell him the truth about what happened, trying to get justice after 25 years of silence. But now somehow the father knew that David was talking. On the night of November 18, 2019, Michael's phone rang at exactly 2:47 a.m., the precise time that David had died 25 years earlier. This time, when Michael answered, David's voice was different, peaceful, grateful. "Thank you, Michael, for listening, for believing me. I can rest now." The police, armed with Michael's research and the location he had identified, excavated the area beneath the garden shed. They found David Chen's remains, confirming everything the boy's spirit had tried to communicate. Robert Chen was arrested and charged with murder. During interrogation, he confessed to killing his son in a fit of rage and burying the evidence. He had been living with the guilt for 25 years, and when David's spirit finally found a way to tell his story, Robert's conscience couldn't bear it anymore. The call stopped after David's body was found and given a proper burial. Michael never heard the child's voice again, but sometimes, on quiet evenings, when he's working in his office, he feels a sense of peace in the house, as if a great wrong has finally been made right. David Chen's case was officially closed, and his spirit was finally able to find the justice and peace he had been seeking for a quarter of a century. And there you have it, 5 true horror stories that remind us that the most terrifying experiences aren't always supernatural. Sometimes the real horror lies in the actions of real people, and sometimes justice takes decades to find its way to the surface. These stories are real, documented, and verified. The families involved have all moved on with their lives, but their experiences serve as reminders that evil can hide in the most unexpected places. And sometimes, the dead don't rest until their stories are told. If you made it through all 5 stories, congratulations. And I'm sorry for what you're probably going to experience when you try to sleep tonight. Remember to check your locks, keep your lights on, and maybe sleep with one eye open. If you enjoyed tonight's terrifying journey into true horror, make sure to subscribe to SpookFeed and hit that notification bell. We post spine-chilling content like this every single day, and tomorrow night's stories are even more disturbing than tonight's. Let me know in the comments which story affected you the most, and if you have any true horror experiences of your own. Share them below. You might just see your story featured in a future video. Until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and remember, the scariest monsters are often the ones that look just like us. Sweet dreams if you can manage to have any.